У меня презентация будет не техническая. Okay? We're going to talk about physical things that you can build stuff with. We're going to have stories, and then we're going to go drink. That's so yeah. We're going to talk about drunk developers too. So importantly in the middle. So let's talk a little bit about me. Okay. I don't know why not. So I'm Mark. I'm an engineer, originally by trade. I have 2 engineering degrees from Carnegie Mellon. I've been writing code for the last 30 years, and I'm still writing really shitty code. And there are people here who have seen my code. There are people who have worked on my code. I'm sorry. I've started several successful businesses, and I actually have realized that that's actually what I'm good at. Like once a business kind of works, I'm really bad at it, and I need other people to run it. I'm a 0 to 1 guy. I did retire the first time at 31, but then I got bored and I started another business and another one after that. I've invested in over 50 startups. Some of them are still alive. Hopefully I'll make money on some of them. But really I only did it as an education exercise because I wanted to learn what makes a startup succeed. I wanted to learn which entrepreneurs are likely to be successful. It's actually a lot of fun to work with startups because you actually get to do and learn new cool things. So my most recent business is Credit Ninja. We lend money. And we have a really cool logo, but Leon plastered me with the Sphere logo today, so I'm supporting the company here. And originally I'm from Kharkov. So we're going to start with the subtitle there, that done is always better than perfect. You know what? I'm actually really bad with slides, so I'm just going to sort of talk, and maybe this is related, maybe this is not. One of the big things, I can't hold 2 things in my hand. So, when, Vlad talked about this, right? Which is developers and engineers, they like to build things. They really enjoy building machinery. They think they're going to make the next best thing since sliced bread. And then somebody will come and buy it or use it. But the reality of business is not that, right? The reality of business is you want to figure out what the business is. And if you can do that with duct tape and bubble gum, then you're going to spend a lot less time and money figuring it out. So usually when I go to start a business, I think about whatever the problem is that I want to solve, and I think about what is the biggest thing that I don't know about that problem, right? And what is the biggest risk? Right? And usually in most businesses, the biggest risk is, well, what if the customers don't show up, right? Sometimes it's a technical risk, right? Sometimes you base a business on, hey, I want to build the best, I don't know, video compression algorithm. I don't know if you guys have watched Silicon Valley, right? There's something involving... Anyway, so that's the part you want to focus on, right? And it doesn't matter that you solve that particular problem in the best technical way possible. What matters is that you solve it, that you understand that you can solve that problem, right? So if your problem is to build a table, you can build the most amazing table. It's going to be really solid. I hope that one was solid. I wasn't sure. And you're gonna finely craft the wood. You're gonna make sure it all fits together, and that you can stand and jump up and down on the damn thing, and it will take you a year. Or you can go to the hardware store, buy 5 pieces of wood, and duct tape them together. Because if your purpose was, does it look, feel, and smell like a table? Can I paint it over with some stuff, put up some Google ads, and get people to click on them? If it does, somebody wants to buy a table. Great, now I have a business. Now I can go hire a bunch of engineers and figure out how to build the best damn table there is. And in fact, when you go to hire those engineers, because they like to build things, they're going to come and they're going to say, look at my giant architecture. Look at this great thing I want to build. I'm going to sit down, heads down, into the screen, and I'm going to code. And I'm going to write code, and I'm going to write code, I'm going to write tests. It's going to be great, right? Except they don't know what the business is. And in fact, you yourself don't actually know what the business is. So you've written this massive piece of code. It actually does address the problem. You've already solved the initial business problem of, hey, I have a business and I've written this thing. Now, it's possible that 9 to 12 months have passed and maybe somebody else has already launched this business and is making money with it. But you built the best thing, right? It's better than the other guys. And you go to launch your product. And because the other guy launched his product, and he's gotten some customers, he's gotten those early adopters, he's learned some things. And he won't tell you those things, right? They're in his product, they're built in, they're the secret sauce. And so now he's got a 6 or 12-month lead on you. And it doesn't matter if your code is good. What matters is you still need to take those 6 to 9 months, or not, whatever, 12 months, to learn all those things the other guy learned. So what you want to be doing is you want to be, people talk about minimum viable product. I sort of talk about the worst possible thing you can build, right? It's not really minimum viable. It's probably not viable as a product. But it's just enough for you to go out there and get that customer feedback, right? And to learn what they actually want. So, Vlad showed actually that common thing about MVPs with the skateboard and the scooter and the bike and the car and all those things. Let me ask you a question. The guy that bought the skateboard, is that the same customer that's buying the car? He's not. And the guy that bought the bike is not the same guy that bought the skateboard. And so whatever you learned from selling the skateboard doesn't necessarily apply to the car. So you actually want to think about ultimately what those customers are, what they want to pay for, and how do you test if you're able to deliver something that they can pay for, right? And then I have this point about developers being whiny and lazy. So this is actually an interesting point, and let's talk about that a little bit. I don't mean to offend anybody. Like I said, I've been writing code for a long time. I am a developer, and I am lazy and whiny, especially when I write code. But what developers tend to do is they really value their own time, right? Because honestly, the reason I became an engineer is this one magic moment. We actually talked about it yesterday. There's this moment, in the Matrix, right? Neo, he gets plugged in and then he wakes up and he says, "I know Kung Fu," right? And it's this little moment where you become God, right? You can bend reality to your will with your fingers, right? You can think about it. You can make the machine do what you want, right? And that excitement, that like fire that comes inside is that's why you do it. That's I've been doing it since I was 9 years old. I still do. I shouldn't be writing code, right? I actually had a rule for my new business. It was like rule number 3: Mark doesn't write code. It took me about 2 months to break it. Just because it's like a drug, because you really feel this power. And so one of the things you realize is because you have that desire and you want to keep achieving that, you value your time. You don't want to waste your time on stupid things, right? You don't want to write code that's going to get thrown away. You really want to craft this fine machine. And so when somebody from sort of the business side of the business comes and says, "Hey, I need this tomorrow," and you're like, "I can't do that tomorrow." Like, think of all the corner cases. Like we really have to take the time to figure this out and do the right thing. But they don't ask the question of why is it that we need it tomorrow, right? Because they imagine that if it's coming as a request, it is important. Or they think, you know what? If I can't get it done tomorrow, it's not worth doing. So I'm going to tell the guy, like, look, we just can't do this, right? But the reality of the business might be that what's actually needed tomorrow is this little bit of bubble gum that you can chew up and stick there so that whatever is holding it together just lasts until tomorrow, right? And so maybe you don't even need that big piece of duct tape because that'll hold for a couple of days. Maybe you really just need to chew up some gum, shove it in there, and let it go. And it's okay, right? No, you don't get to play God in that moment. You don't get that satisfaction of knowing how it works, right? You don't get to open source it and talk about it. But what you get to do is solve a business problem, which is great. And so sometimes it's very, very important to ask the non-technical question, to ask the, well, what if I'm thinking about this wrong? And I always try to do that. In fact, one of the things I do in my business is almost every morning I walk into Jack's office. He's the COO, he runs operations, and I say, what are we screwing up today? And he's like, why are you asking me this question? He's like, well, I asked it yesterday, and we thought about it, and there wasn't anything yesterday. But 2 days ago, I asked the question. He said, well, there's this little thing that I don't really like, and we talked about it. And so rather than thinking about, like, what are we doing right, because ultimately if you're doing it right, you don't need to think about it. Keep asking this question of, what am I doing wrong? What am I not thinking about? What if I took a step this way and looked at it a different way? Right? Maybe it's going to be better. The part you wanted to get to, huh? All right, we're going to do a little survey. So, who here likes to drink beer? Keep your hands up. Come on, keep your hands up. Good. Wine. More? No? More hands? Whiskey? All right, good, good. Vodka? Tequila? Champagne? All right. We'll stay away from the hard drugs. So clearly, a lot of people like to relax with some alcohol. Yeah, clearly some people like to relax with some alcohol. And, you know, it's... I do too. I enjoy red wine. I enjoy Prosecco. I think we've been drinking that for a week here. And it becomes an interesting combination with this optimism that developers have, right? Because they've achieved godhood in their head. They've created the perfect machine. They've rolled it out to production. It's passed all their tests. It works. So what do? Well, they high-five each other. They leave the office, and they go to the bar. You know, it's Thursday night. Let's go out. It's actually happened to me many, many years ago. We were in the process of building the business that became Enova, which is a Sphere customer. And we had written, I don't remember what exactly it was. It had something to do with interfacing with bank files, which is a very important part of that business. And everything worked. It was a friend of mine's birthday, and a whole bunch of us all knew him. So we all go to a nice Italian restaurant. We get a bunch of pasta, some pizza, and they had these giant jugs of red wine. I mean, you know, like, I don't know, I think they were like 5 liters. I don't know how many of those we went through, but it was a good night. And about 4 hours later, I get this frantic call from our CEO, who was not at this particular party. And he says, do you realize that the file hasn't gone out? I, slightly slurring, say, what file? The bank file, you idiot. And I'm like, well, why not? Will you tell me? So here we are, 4 guys with probably 2 to 2.5 liters of wine in each of us, 4 laptops, a not so well working cellular internet connection, with 15 minutes until the bank closes to get this file out. That's a lot of stress, let me tell you. This happens all the time. So I now have a rule, which is if you can't do your job drunk, you can't do your job, right? Because you know what? You're an optimist. You think it works. It might work. It might work with all your tests, whatever. And then when you happen to be at a bar and many drinks in, it won't. So this is a lesson I learned very early in my life. I believe that in a business, it's important that everybody always pulls in the same direction. So I once had a bug. Code I wrote. Remember I told you guys I write shitty code. I had a bug that cost me personally $473,000. It's a lot of money. So, does that suck? Yeah. Yeah, I cried a little that day, let me tell you. So you'd ask, well, you write shitty code, and wouldn't you stop writing shitty code after that? Like maybe you take your time, right? Make sure that it works. So the reality is that bug was actually one that I didn't write shitty code on. It was something that was extraordinarily important. I spent probably a month working on that algorithm that had maybe 100 lines of code. It had every test from everywhere. I mean, it was perfect. But what I didn't realize is where that got plugged into. So the bug was not in my code. It was in how somebody else was using my code, right? And I just didn't protect against that. So there's yet another thing that you can't think about, right? It's there. But what's important is that it didn't just cost me money. The reason it cost us money is actually cost the whole business money, and everybody had equity in the business, and there was, we had to refund a whole bunch of money, and so that happened to be my portion. But everybody involved also had skin in the game. And so, that was one time, but that bug was bad enough where we would have kept going and would have kept paying this money. And so because everybody had skin in the game, everybody stayed. Nobody went home to sleep. Nobody went home to sleep the next day. We figured out how to fix it. And I know for a fact, because I worked at companies where that wasn't the case, where at some point people go, you know what, that's your problem. You stay. You broke it, you stay. So there's a lot to be said for working together, because the reality is that sometimes you just can't figure it out on your own. Yeah, sometimes you need a rubber duck, but sometimes you need a real human. So this is a quote from, actually I've heard this from 3 people who have separately worked for me over the years. It's a favorite quote of developers. They say, when something breaks, what'll happen? Well, I'll get a page and I'll fix it. You won't. You won't answer the phone. You won't have battery in your phone. Oh, thank you. Again, we talked about this, developers being optimists, and I think one of the things that I've realized over the years is that if you rely on whatever system you built to also notify you that it's broken, then maybe you should think about a little bit more about how to minimize the damage when it does break, right? So rather than saying, hey, I'm going to have this trigger here that says, I have an unexpected condition, let's just dump a bunch of logs and, page the guy on duty. Maybe it's worth thinking about when this thing breaks, not if, but when. How do I ensure that the rest of the business goes on, right? So, for example, we talked about, there's that file that didn't go out when we all got drunk. The bug that caused the file to go out was on a single line. And after that, I made sure that any kind of failure that involved any sort of batching anywhere would only affect the one item that broke. And it could sort of self-heal and keep going. Because really, it's not about getting that page. You'll get the page. It might take you a little time to get back to a computer or whatever it may be. But by that point, the failure may be catastrophic, right? And so for when you're writing sort of this defensive code and acknowledge that you're capable of writing shitty code, then the failure should be minimized. And then it doesn't even have to page you, right? You can just see it in the logs in the morning when you get in. Now, obviously, if you have a catastrophic failure, you should still have that, but sometimes it helps to think about the fact that things will break. And think about it not from the perspective of an engineer, but think about it from the business and say, well, when it breaks, how do I make sure that it costs me the least amount of money possible? And just ask that question. See? We'll start drinking soon, unless you guys have questions. Yes?
One more time, please.
Этот баг, который вот тебе стоил 400.
No, I was entirely sober. I had spent an enormous amount of time making sure that I got it right. And the part that I spent all that time on was right. It wasn't expecting to get wrong inputs.
Just curious, I'm not sure this question has an answer, but just let's imagine, since we have a few minutes, let's imagine I am a serial entrepreneur, right? And I hired some engineers, and they built me a system from duct tape and bubble gum, and it kind of works. It kind of scales up to a point. And at a certain point, at a certain moment, I noticed that, adding a new button to the system, takes a week or two, because every engineer that needs to add the button obviously needs to keep in mind all the duct tapes and all the bubble gums added by every engineer, right, to this system. And also engineers change, so when you hire a new person to the team, it takes a lot of time to onboard this person, right? So what would be your suggestion in this case? Just start thinking about selling the company, or
So, it's actually interesting. So we have a certified quote for that. It's called "That's a good problem to have," because that means you have a business that makes money, right? And it's sort of running along there. Yeah, you can sell the business, and hopefully the other guy won't know. Sure. You can refactor, right? You can look at where's the risks, where's the tech debt, right? And allocate time to it, right? Because again, now you can afford to do so, right? Because now you can hire the extra guy or two and say, look, I'm going to take 10%, 20% of the time to start cleaning this garbage up, right? What you don't do is do a rewrite, right? Because the reality is, since you've built it out of duct tape and bubble gum, you don't actually know how it works. You don't know what it does. So you carefully fix some pieces, right? You modularize, you pull them out, you build services for stuff, and hopefully you fix it.
maybe there is some rule of thumb, to keep this balance. So for you, how do you feel it, or is it just a gut feeling, between the speed and the speed of development and maintainability?
You know what a rule of thumb is? It's when you put your thumb over here and you whack it with the hammer. That's a rule of thumb. Okay. Look, I think that is experience, right? That is having done it a few times. You know where the grabli are, and you look at, is this a big risk, right? So something that's, core business logic to the thing that makes your business work, that's probably something that you want to start fixing up early, right? Things on the periphery, probably not, right? If that, that support page for affiliates has bugs in it, but you only get a visit a month on it, maybe it doesn't matter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Еще вопросы? Я кого-то не замечаю.
Which services do you use for investing money in startups?
Which services do I use for investing money in startups? Wire and ACH, email, the phone sometimes. Sometimes I meet people in, in a bar or coffee shop. Never use cash.
Okay, firstly, you should discover the startups, and secondly, you can invest.
Look,
Or
so
contact
look,
the
I'm being a little
CEO.
bit facetious, right? I'm on AngelList. I'm on, I don't know, a bunch of other platforms like that. I can tell you that the majority of startups that I have invested in, that I was actually interested in, not sort of jumping on the bandwagon for, it's been because of personal relationships. It's been because somebody calls me up and says, listen, I know this guy, he's working on something interesting, I trust him, right? And this is coming from somebody who I trust. Because the reality is there's lots and lots and lots of startups out there. Most of them are complete garbage. And even out of the ones that aren't complete garbage, most are still going to fail. Ultimately, it's not about the idea. It is about the team. That is all I ever invest in. Every time I've invested in an idea, somebody else has done that idea better.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe you know the current situation with the Microsoft Windows updates. It have a lot of bug and even can delete the user data. So my question, is it this approach, the done is better than perfect, is really applicable for major business, not for startups? Thank you.
I don't know how to run a major business. I also don't think that Microsoft takes the done is better than perfect approach. I do have some friends that work there. They have lots of tests, lots and lots, but they have a very complicated environment, right? They're trying to be everything to everyone. I mean, that's fundamentally what Windows is, right? It's installed on lots and lots of different platforms, and it kind of has to work on all of them. Having said that, I don't run Windows. Right? I have a Mac, and then I VM some Linux stuff, and those things break too. And by the way, shipping software is hard, very hard, and done is better than perfect probably doesn't apply to shipping software, right? When you used to buy software shrink wrapped on a shelf, and I know some of you are too young to remember that, those things had to be really good, right? If you're putting software in a spaceship, yeah, that's got to be really good. But that's not what most of us work on, right? Most of us work on stuff that's, software as a service. It's a website. It's in the cloud. That means that your break-fix cycle is real short, right? You got a bug, roll it out, right? And do deployment several times a day. So you have to put it into context.
So, any other questions, guys? No question? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.